Hello everyone and welcome. This is a behind the scenes look at a 2-camera interview setup that I did recently inside of a theater. And I'll sort of be going through it and talking about the process, how we lit it, what are some of the challenges we faced, and just general behind the scenes talk. If you ever wanted to learn how to do like an interview setup for corporate, documentary, or television, this is how to do it. So if you're into that sort of thing, stick around and enjoy. So right here is just a quick time lapse of the overall setup. You can see we have 2 cameras going. And in this, we're obviously moving very fast, but the whole interview setup took about 2 hours. For this setup, we have 2 cameras inside of a theater. Both of them are currently on prime lenses, and one of them is on a slider. This helps the editor cut back and forth between the main shot, which was my camera, and a secondary shot, which has motion in it. So when the interviewee messes up a line, or they want to cut for dramatic reason, dramatic purposes, they can cut from the A camera to the B camera, which has some nice motion in it. It just helps make things more dynamic and interesting. So for the A camera, we have an FS7. I believe I started off on a 35mm prime lens, and then we've got my A7S as the B camera with a 50mm lens, I believe. Here you can see me testing either side for look direction, what it would look like with the interviewee on the left side or the right side, and I believe we ended up with this look in particular, with the interviewee being on the right side. Right now I'm getting the AC stand set up for our key light. So now that we had our interviewee kind of stand in and our camera sort of roughed in, we can start lighting, and so that's what we're moving on to now. We have this big kind of silk sheet that we're attaching to the C-stand arm, and that's giving us kind of a big diffused source that we're going to put our lights through. I actually got that idea from my friend Zach, who is working with me on this shoot. So here you can see I'm setting up some stands. These are going to hold both of our key lights. We used 2 light panels for this key light setup. Neither of them were at full intensity, and they're just the normal 4x light panels, not even the 6x. I think both of them were at like half power. The reason I used 2 of them is because I wanted a larger source to come through the diffusion. And we're using a technique that my friend Zach taught me about called double break. And that's when you have your key light going through 2 sources of diffusion. So for the light panels here, I have a 1x1 sheet of opal frost in front of both of them. They're just the gels that come with the light panels. And then the second form of diffusion to double break it is that big silk sheet that you can see here. It used to be that you had to find separate circuits or breakers or outlets to power your lights, especially in the incandescent days. But now that most lights are all LEDs, you can power 2 lights like this, and the power draw isn't going to blow a breaker. So you can see me plugging both of those into a cube tap there, and we're just using one outlet to power them both. Alright, so here I'm just checking out the second angle. We're checking out to make sure the key light looks good, and I think we're both kind of discussing that we like it, but some minor adjustments need to be made. And here I'm powering off the overhead lights. So this is pretty important when you're setting up an interview setting. You want to be able to control all of the lighting. In this situation, we could turn off most of the lights, but the emergency lights were not able to be turned off. So we had to work with those, and we ended up flagging one of those off in the second look we did. Here you can see myself removing the restroom is this way sign. You could barely make it out in the background of our shots, but attention to detail like that is important, and even though you couldn't tell what it was, if we can get rid of it, why not get rid of it and just make the background a little bit cleaner? So as I mentioned earlier, we are in a theater, or maybe I didn't mention that earlier. We're in a theater, if you haven't guessed. And theaters are pretty dark, especially with the overhead lights off. So it required a little bit more lighting in the background than a normal interview setup outside of a theater might. So for this reason, I'm using almost all of the lighting I brought with me here. So right now I'm using my Asteras to light up the background, and I'm using all 4 of them to do that. Because theaters are so dark, we needed to use a little bit more lighting to help bring up our background and make it more interesting. Otherwise it would have just been this black hole. Right here you can see that the wide angle lens of my behind the scenes camera fell off, and I found it on the floor and put it back on. So yeah, I'm just taking my Asteras and kind of putting them in pleasing spots for my shot and for Zach's shot in the background. I would love to have kept some color in these lights for the background lights, but not everybody likes color as much as I do, and especially for clients that are trying to make just kind of like a visually pleasing yet clear messaged video like this one, I decided not to use color. Sometimes I use color. It's pretty rare. Most of the time I'm just using the daylight or tungsten color temperatures. So that would be 3200 degrees or 5600 degrees. In this case, we're using daylight, so 5600 degrees Kelvin, which is the same color temperature as the sun, if you didn't know. So now that we've got some of these placed, I'm just making sure that they're all the same color temperature, and you saw me there in the previous shot kind of adjusting that. In the meantime, Zach was setting up our edge light, which helps separate our subject from the background. Here I'm looking for a missing piece of equipment, which unfortunately happens sometimes, but I lost a power supply unit for a light that I wanted to use as our hair light. Luckily we had a solution on set, and it's always important to be able to problem solve on set because problems like this come up all the time. Hopefully it's not a piece of gear you don't have. I think I must have left this piece on another set at some point and not realized it. But we did have another solution to power the light, so it all worked out okay. But on-the-fly problem solving is a thing that comes up all the time in situations like this, and so it's a good skill to have. Here you can see I'm just adjusting the edge light, and again, that is just the edge hitting the edge of our subject to help separate them a little bit from the background. Now I'm having the interviewee shift their body towards the camera. That's pretty important because the way we set up the cameras and the way that the seats were facing were different directions, and you always kind of want your interviewee to face the camera. It just creates a better look, a more pleasing look. I mean, I could show you right now. If I'm talking to you like this, it's kind of a little awkward, but if I turn my whole body towards the camera and talk to you, it feels a little bit better. So that's what I was having our interviewee do in that shot. And that's a stand-in. That was our producer. So she was just actually standing in so we could get our framing and everything. Our interviewee hadn't showed up yet. So here I'm handing out our last little bits of lighting. We wanted a couple more lights in the background of Zach's shot because Zach's shot is much wider than mine, and those two lights kind of helped brighten up his shot a little bit in the background, which is nice. Here I'm placing the interview chair. The interviewer would sit in that chair to interview the interviewee. and we're getting some last kind of looks. And now we're talking about a thing that you wouldn't typically talk about, but do talk about a lot in the last year or so, and that is COVID compliance. So we had talked about this a little earlier in the shoot as well, but now that we've got things sort of in place and roughed in, we're worried that we might be a little too close to our interview subject, and we're worried about that I might be a little too close to the interviewer. I really didn't want to move the cameras because at this point we had the lenses I wanted to use, and our shots looked nice, but thankfully my crew talked some sense into me, and it was definitely a better idea for us to move back, change the lenses, and create space between everyone on set, keeping the 6 feet rule. Normally that's not something you have to worry about, except if you're in the middle of a pandemic. So yeah, we ended up swapping the B camera lens to I think a 75 millimeter. And we moved it back, so it was still the wider shot, but there was much more distance between everyone involved. And then I swapped my camera from a prime lens to a 70-200 zoom lens, which enabled me to get farther away from everybody too. I was worried that it would create a problem with the look direction and how the interview shot looked, compressing it more, which I didn't really want to do, but it ended up looking very good, and I'm thankful that they were able to talk some sense into me, because it's better to be safe, especially when it comes to your health. So now I'm addressing some light leak issues we were having with our background lights. We were able to see the bright light through the theater chairs because of the angles that our cameras were at. So we were just taping off the front of the lights there so we didn't see it leak through the chairs. Little details like that need to be taken care of before you're ready to shoot. Now I'm just looking at the B camera shot, making sure everything looks nice. I'm pretty sure I'm happy with my shot. We're just doing some last little tweaks and stuff to the brightness of lighting. But more or less we're all set, and we're kind of just, if you give me time, I'm gonna play, and we're sort of just waiting for our first interviewee to show up. So here's kind of what our finished main shot looked like, and our finished secondary shot. After we filmed our first interview, we added in a hair light, which helped separate the interviewee from the background even more. And that's an important part of just being on set and learning how to shoot like this, is just adapting to different situations. Sometimes you will get halfway through an interview and realize that you want to change something. And if it's not a big deal, if it's not a big change, you can make that change in between interviews. I hope this was helpful. I hope that people were able to gain something from it. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. And as always, thanks for watching, and you're great.